On the morning of August 21st, 1996, a neighbor in Moline, Illinois, looked out and saw an 11-year-old girl climb into the passenger side of a gray, box-style sedan parked in her own driveway. The car resembled a Chevrolet Cavalier, boxy, older model, silver or gray. The driver was a white male, somewhere in his 20s, with brown curly hair worn long to his shoulders, tucked under a baseball cap. The girl was wearing a black one-piece swimsuit under spandex shorts, a t-shirt, blue tennis shoes, and white socks. She had a beach towel tucked under her arm. She was headed to go swimming, even though her father had told her she couldn't. The car pulled away from the driveway, turned down the road, and disappeared. And from that moment forward, no one ever saw Trudy Appleby again. Not her father, not her mother. Not her best friend who had been with her just 12 hours before, making plans for the very morning. An 11-year-old girl got into a car on a Wednesday morning in the Quad Cities, and for nearly 3 decades, the only thing her family could do was wait and hope and beg. Beg for someone, anyone, to tell them what happened to their child. Before we go any further into this case, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Moline is a small community in western Illinois, one of 4 cities straddling the Mississippi River in what's known as the Quad Cities. It's the kind of place where people recognize faces and remember names. Someone watching this right now might be from that area. Someone watching might know something, and in a case like this, that matters more than you think. Yours Trudy Leanne Appleby was born on September 4th, 1984, to Dennis Appleby and Brenda Gordon. She grew up in Moline, Illinois, a working-class city along the Mississippi, where everybody seemed to know everybody, and kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. By all accounts from the people who knew her, Trudy was the kind of child who filled a space with energy the moment she walked into it. Her former neighbor, Kelly Carlson, remembered the very first time she ever met Trudy. Carlson looked out her window one afternoon, and there was this unfamiliar little girl standing in her front yard, doing cartwheels, skipping, and jumping up and down for no apparent reason. When Carlson went outside and asked if she could help her, the girl said her name was Trudy, that she lived down the street, and she wanted to know if Carlson had any kids she could play with. From that day forward, Trudy was at the Carlson home almost every day. She became inseparable with Carlson's oldest daughter. The two were like sisters, 2 years apart, bonded instantly. And Trudy herself started calling Kelly Carlson Mom Number 2. Trudy was known throughout the neighborhood as the girl who was always skipping, not walking, not running, skipping. She skipped down the street to visit friends. She skipped back home when it was time for dinner. She loved rollerblading around the block, playing flashlight tag after dark with the other kids, and spending afternoons in front of the television playing Nintendo. She liked hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. She was energetic and outgoing, and according to everyone who knew her, she rarely sat still for more than a few minutes at a time. Her pastor at First Baptist Church of East Moline, Reverend Dan Yeager, remembered that Trudy never stayed in one spot during church services. She liked to move. She liked to run around. She was family there, known and loved. But there was more to Trudy than the cartwheels and the rollerblades. She was smart, genuinely, measurably smart. Her teachers had recommended her for the gifted program at school, and Trudy talked about it with a pride that made the adults around her pay attention. Carlson recalled Trudy saying that her dad wanted to put her in the gifted program, and Carlson told her that was because she was smart. The girl lit up. She had ambitions. She had things she wanted to do. And she had saved approximately $200 from her own efforts, money she was keeping at home for an upcoming family vacation. She left every cent of that money behind on the day she disappeared. A child planning to run away takes the cash. Trudy left it. Her closest friend was a girl named Amber Dunlap, who went by Holderfield at the time and lived nearby on 42nd Street. Amber was 13, 2 years older, and the two had been nearly inseparable for 5 years. They spent their summers rollerblading through the neighborhood, riding bikes, eating dinner at each other's houses, and engaging in a nightly ritual that both of them took seriously. Whenever Amber walked Trudy home, they would split at the middle of Trudy's driveway and run in opposite directions. And then one of them would shout to confirm she'd made it safely, either home or back to the street. It was their system, their way of making sure the other was okay. On the evening of August 20th, 1996, The night before everything changed, Amber walked Trudy home one last time. The two had spent the evening together. They ate dinner, they went rollerblading, and they made plans to see each other the following day. Trudy was supposed to come to Amber's house in the morning. They said goodnight the way they always did. Amber went home. That was the last time she ever saw her friend. The next morning, Amber overslept. She didn't call Trudy. She didn't walk over. For years afterward, that fact stayed with her. As a child, she carried the weight of believing that if she had just woken up on time and called Trudy that morning, thought her friend would still be here. As an adult, she came to understand that what happened was not her fault. But the guilt shaped her for decades. Now that you know who Trudy Appleby was, not a case number, not a name on a missing persons flyer, but a real little girl who skipped everywhere she went and got excited about being called smart. Does she remind you of anyone in your life? A daughter? A niece? A kid from the neighborhood who always showed up in your yard looking for someone to play with? Tell me in the comments. Keeping Trudy's name alive is the least any of us can do. In the days leading up to August 21st, 1996, Trudy had been asking her father, Dennis Appleby, for permission to go swimming on Campbell's Island with a friend. Campbell's Island sits along the Mississippi River near East Moline. And Trudy was familiar with the area. She was friends with the children of David Whipple, a family acquaintance who lived on the island, and she had accompanied Whipple's family on boat outings before. Swimming on the river was something she enjoyed, but Dennis told her no. There was a family trip coming up, and he didn't want her going out on the water. That was supposed to be the end of it. On the morning of August 21st, Dennis left for work around 9 a.m. Before he walked out the door, he saw Trudy sleeping. He went to his job. At some point during the day, he returned home briefly for lunch, left food and a note on the table for her, and went back to work. The food and the note were undisturbed when he returned. Nothing in the house appeared out of place. But sometime between 9:30 and 10:30 that morning, after Dennis had left for work, a neighbor watched Trudy walk into the driveway of her home and climb into the passenger side of an older model, gray or silver four-door vehicle. The family residence was set back from the main road and was not visible from the street, which is an important detail. Whoever drove that car into Trudy's driveway knew where she lived. The driver matched the description investigators would later circulate. A white male in his 20s, curly brown or black hair, baseball cap. Trudy had her swimsuit and a towel. Phone records later confirmed she may have made plans to go swimming, despite her father telling her no. But she never arrived at any swimming spot. She never showed up at a friend's house. She simply vanished. When Dennis came home from work that afternoon, Trudy was gone. But he initially thought she might be with her mother, Brenda Gordon, who may have been camping at the time. But by 7 p.m., with no word from anyone and no sign of his daughter, Dennis picked up the phone and called the Moline Police Department. He told them plainly that they had a problem. His daughter was missing. The Moline Police Department's initial response treated the case as a possible runaway. On paper, the surface details supported that classification. Trudy had defied her father's instructions about swimming. She had voluntarily gotten into a vehicle. She took a swimsuit and a towel, but that theory disintegrated quickly. Trudy had left behind $200 in savings. She made no contact with anyone. Not her mother, not her friends, not a single person, after that car pulled out of the driveway. And the more investigators looked at the circumstances, the more they became convinced this was not a child who chose to leave. The Doe Network would eventually classify Trudy's disappearance as a non-family abduction. In the immediate aftermath, the response was intense. The Moline police canvassed the neighborhood. Search dogs were brought in. Neighbors walked for miles distributing flyers. This was 1996, before social media, before Amber Alerts could spread a child's face across the country in minutes. The community did what communities did in those days. They knocked on doors, they passed out paper, and they prayed. Carlson remembered the fear that settled over the neighborhood. Everyone watched their kids more closely. Everyone was scared. The police were a constant presence. The news cameras came and went. But despite the effort, as the investigation produced no arrests, no solid suspects, and no trace of Trudy Appleby. The case went cold in the way cold cases do, not with a declaration, but with silence. Tips slowed, leads dried up, the years accumulated, but the Appleby family refused to let the case die. Every year on August 21st, they held a candlelight vigil, first at First Baptist Church of East Moline and later at other locations in the community. They kept Trudy's name in the press. They pleaded year after year for anyone who knew anything to come forward. Trudy's mother, Brenda Gordon, was the driving force behind those vigils. She kept the energy alive when exhaustion and grief might have swallowed it. The investigation continued in the background, slowly, methodically, and mostly out of public view. It wasn't until 2017, 21 years after Trudy vanished, that the Moline Police Department made a breakthrough public. They named William Ed Smith as a person of interest. Smith was a family friend of the Applebys. A man in his 60s at the time, investigators focused on him. A witness had come forward, reportedly Smith's own son-in-law, David Whipple, and told investigators that he had seen Trudy in Smith's vehicle on August 21, 1996, headed towards Smith's residence on Campbell's Island. Smith had access to a car matching the description of the gray vehicle the neighbor saw. And within a short time after Trudy's disappearance, that vehicle had been sent to a scrapyard and destroyed. Whipple's delay in coming forward had an explanation. According to investigators, Smith had threatened to kill Whipple if he ever told police what he had seen. That threat kept Whipple quiet for years. He eventually gave a statement to investigators in the early 2000s, but it wasn't until 2017 that the information was made public. Smith himself never admitted to anything. He was questioned early in the investigation in 1996 and denied seeing Trudy the day she disappeared. According to case files, Smith was seen alone later on August 21st without Trudy, but she was never seen with him or anyone else again. People who knew Smith told investigators that he became visibly despondent whenever Trudy's name came up in conversation. He frequented the waterways around Campbell's Island, spending time near Blackbird Island and Dynamite Island, remote areas along the Mississippi accessible only by boat. Smith died on December 23, 2014, at the age of 72. He never confessed. He never provided any information. He took whatever he knew to his grave. Investigators pressed forward. In October 2017, they followed a tip and excavated the site of an old home on Campbell's Island, a property that had once belonged to Whipple and been demolished by Rock Island County in 2004. The search produced no evidence. In the summer of 2018, police rented 2 billboards in East Moline bearing Trudy's photograph, hoping the public pressure would shake loose new information. Then, in December 2018, came a development that energized the investigation. Police seized a boat they believed may have been used to transport Trudy after her disappearance. And the boat had passed through several owners over the decades and was found with a family living 2 hours from the Quad Cities, who were reportedly stunned to learn of its possible connection. The vessel was sent to the FBI crime lab in Springfield, Illinois, and later to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, where hundreds of swabs were collected and tested for DNA comparison. In August 2020, the Moline Police Department publicly named 2 more persons of interest, David Whipple and Jamison Jamie Fisher. Whipple was Smith's son-in-law and had been the witness who placed Trudy in Smith's car. He was also a registered sex offender, convicted of sexually abusing a 10-year-old girl in Rock Island County. Fisher was a lifelong friend of the Smith family, all with a criminal history that included felony drug charges and multiple protective orders. Investigators stated publicly that both men had knowledge of what happened to Trudy and may have been involved in covering it up. They urged anyone with information to come forward, adding a phrase that would be repeated many times. Please do not assume that we know what you may know. No information is insignificant. Detective Michael Griffin, who had led the investigation since 2015, did not mince words. He told the press that those with knowledge of the case were refusing to come forward. He said investigators were getting half-truths from some and being stonewalled by others. He said flatly that people were protecting a child predator. Whipple continued to deny involvement until his death in August 2022 at the age of 61. With Smith dead since 2014, Jamison Fisher became the last living person of interest. In August 2023, police executed a search warrant at a property on the 600 block of 8th Street in Kelowna. An excavation crew dug into the ground. Crime scene tape ringed the area. Trudy's uncle, Ray Edelman, watched from nearby. Once again, no human remains were found. You've now seen the same evidence that investigators worked with for nearly 3 decades. A scrapped car, a seized boat, a witness silenced by threats, a sex offender who denied everything, and a man in prison on drug charges who may have held the key all along. Before I walk through the theories, I want to hear from you. What's your read on this? What do you think happened to Trudy Appleby on August 21st, 1996? Drop your theory in the comments. For years, the primary theory among law enforcement centered on William Ed Smith. The evidence pointed in his direction. He was the last known person to be seen with Trudy. A witness placed her in his car. The vehicle was scrapped within days, and he had access to the river and the boats that could move a body to places no one would think to look. Detective Griffin told reporters publicly that the investigation's theory was that Trudy was victimized through sexual criminal misconduct at the hands of adult males, and that she may have been lured to Campbell's Island under the promise that her father had changed his mind about swimming. Trudy's father, Dennis Appleby, supported a version of this theory. He believed Smith and Whipple took Trudy out on a boat on the Mississippi and something happened, perhaps an accident, perhaps something deliberate that resulted in her death. Trudy had been on boat trips with Whipple's family before. The waterway was familiar territory for all of them. But in November 2025, court documents filed by prosecutors introduced a different narrative. According to those filings, Jamison Fisher abducted Trudy Appleby because of a drug debt owed by her father. Prosecutors stated that Dennis Appleby had been seeking a large quantity of methamphetamine in the weeks before Trudy vanished, and that a fellow dealer named Billy Smith Jr. introduced Dennis to Fisher approximately 2 to 3 weeks before August 21st. Fisher was a methamphetamine dealer operating in the Quad Cities that summer. Fisher's then-girlfriend, Tiffany Fuller, is expected to testify that on or about the morning after Trudy's disappearance, yes, Fisher told her he had taken Trudy as collateral for the drug debt Dennis owed. Fuller is also expected to say that Trudy was killed near the train bridge across from Kershaw Mobile Home Park in Kelowna, placing the location of the crime in Henry County, where the case was ultimately charged. Fuller did not report what she knew for years because, in her words, she was scared to death of Fisher due to previous domestic violence. Another witness, Mandy West, is expected to testify that on August 21st, 1996, she attended a gathering about half a mile from the Kershaw area and saw Fisher carrying a lifeless young girl to a boat. West did not go to police until 2016, after Fisher allegedly broke out all the windows of her home, an act that triggered the buried memory. Well, a separate witness told prosecutors that Fisher once confessed to moving Trudy's body multiple times. Yet another recalled Fisher bragging in 2017 about choking Trudy to death and hiding her body. One witness said Fisher told her plainly that no one would ever find Trudy's remains. Multiple witnesses have identified Fisher as the owner of a silver Chevrolet Cavalier during the summer of 1996, a vehicle matching the description of the car Trudy was last seen entering. An associate named Rory Bruno is expected to testify that he regularly drove Fisher around in the Cavalier to sell methamphetamine that summer, and that after Trudy's disappearance, he never saw the car again. Prosecutors have also presented evidence that Fisher had a pattern of taking property as ransom for drug debts. Another acquaintance is expected to testify that Fisher once held a man's dog and tools as leverage over an unpaid debt. According to the prosecution, taking an 11-year-old child was an escalation of that same behavior. That's the prosecution's case: a drug debt, alleged confessions to multiple people over many years, a vehicle that matches, a witness who saw a lifeless child being carried to a boat, and a pattern of taking collateral for debts. But here's what still unsettles me. If Fisher acted alone that morning, how does the witness sighting of Trudy and Ed Smith's car near Campbell's Island fit the timeline? Were Smith and Fisher connected more deeply than investigators initially realized? Were there others involved who have never been named? The defense will hammer these gaps, and the prosecution knows it. Tell me in the comments, which piece of this case bothers you the most? On August 13, 2025, a Henry County grand jury indicted 50-year-old Jamison Albert Fisher on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death. The indictment came just days before the 29th anniversary of Trudy's disappearance. Fisher was already in custody in Iowa on unrelated drug charges and a parole violation when the Moline Police Department served the warrant. At a press conference the following day, Moline Police Chief Darren Galt addressed the media and the community with measured words that carried the weight of nearly 3 decades. He stated that 10,584 days had passed since the family of Trudy Appleby began waiting. He confirmed the arrest and the charges. And he said the case had haunted not only the family, but every investigator who touched it, and the community as a whole. Henry County State's Attorney, Catherine Runty, confirmed that the charges allege Fisher strangled Trudy. Rock Island County State's Attorney, Dora Villarreal, added that evidence supported kidnapping charges, but the statute of limitations had expired on that count. Fisher pleaded not guilty at his arraignment. His defense team subsequently filed a motion to move the trial out of Henry County, citing nearly 30 years of media coverage, at least 183 local television and newspaper stories by their count, that they argue has made a fair local trial impossible. Prosecutors opposed the motion. It's pointing out that Fisher himself had contributed to the publicity by conducting a jailhouse interview in which he proclaimed his innocence and accused police of framing him. As of early 2026, pre-trial hearings continue. A motion hearing was scheduled for spring, and the prosecution has indicated plans to call between 25 and 30 witnesses. Fisher has maintained his innocence throughout. In his jailhouse interview, he denied ever meeting, speaking to, or being in the presence of Trudy Appleby. He claimed police are targeting him because he is a drug dealer who causes trouble. When the Moline police chief was asked to respond, he dismissed the claims without engagement. Trudy's body has never been recovered. Prosecutors have alleged her remains may have been moved after her death. Then one witness reportedly contacted Fisher's girlfriend after his arrest and asked whether he should move the so-called buried treasure. The search for Trudy continues. This case sat without an arrest for nearly 30 years. 30 years of vigils and billboards and families begging for someone to talk. But cold didn't mean closed, and it never meant forgotten. If you've ever followed a case that was finally cracked after decades of nothing, a case everyone else had given up on, tell me about it in the comments. Those stories remind us that time doesn't erase the truth. It just makes it harder to find. There is a part of Trudy's story that has to be told because it reveals how deeply this case carved into the lives of everyone connected to it. Trudy's mother, Brenda Gordon, spent 18 years looking for answers. She was the force behind the annual vigils. Her pastor said the real energy to keep Trudy's memory alive came from Brenda. On October 10, 2014, Brenda was attempting to cross Avenue of the cities in Moline when she was struck by a van. The driver's blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit. He had 2 prior DUI arrests. Brenda was 53 years old. She was pronounced dead at the hospital from massive traumatic injuries. She never learned what happened to her only child. Within 3 months of Brenda's death, Trudy's grandmother, Ann Edelman, passed away at 77. Ed Smith, the man investigators believed may have been the last person to see Trudy alive, had died just weeks before Brenda in December 2014. David Whipple would follow in the 2022. Nay, the circle of people who might have held the truth grew smaller every year, but the community held the line. Trudy's uncle, Ray Edelman, took over where his sister left off. He organized the vigils. He spoke to the press. He stood at every search site and watched the crews dig. Year after year, he came back to the same place on the same date and asked the same question. Why are we still doing this after all these years? Trudy's childhood friend, Amber Dunlap, attended all but 2 of the 29 vigils held since 1996. She said she could still see Trudy standing down the street she always skipped along. She could see her face, but she could no longer hear her voice. Kelly Carlson kept a missing persons poster in her front window for 29 years and said it would stay there until Trudy came home. That billboards went up and came down and went up again. A Facebook page called Missing Trudy Appleby kept her face visible in the digital age. The Quad Cities Missing Persons Network walked Campbell's Island, knocking on doors and distributing flyers. Detective after detective picked up the case file and refused to set it down. When the arrest was announced in August 2025, the reactions from those closest to Trudy were complicated. Ray Edelman said he was not surprised. He was relieved, but it was not a celebration. He said the only way he could be satisfied is if the arrest could undo what happened, and it cannot. He said he does not hate the man charged with killing his niece, because holding on to hatred means the person who did this wins. Amber Dunlap said she cried for 6 hours straight when she heard the news. As Kelly Carlson thought about what Brenda would have said, and she believed Brenda would have asked what took them so long. When learning that court documents alleged Trudy was taking over her father's drug debt, Ray was honest about his feelings. He said Dennis's choices were Dennis's own, but no one deserves to have their child taken from them for any reason. The family does not blame Dennis. They blame the man who, according to prosecutors, decided an 11-year-old girl was an acceptable form of collateral. Trudy Appleby would be 41 years old today. Kelly Carlson once said she often wonders what Trudy would have done with her life, how far that intelligence and that energy could have carried her. We will never know, but we know she was real. We know she skipped down the street to visit friends and did cartwheels in a neighbor's yard and saved $200 for a trip she never got to take. We know her family never stopped looking, and we know the people of Moline, Illinois, neighbors, friends, teachers, detectives, strangers, carried her name for 3 decades because they refused to let her disappear twice. If you have any information about Trudy Appleby's case or the location of her remains, contact the Moline Police Department at 309-797-0401 or Crime Stoppers. Of the Quad Cities at 309-762-9500. Tips can also be submitted anonymously through the 3 Tips mobile app or at qcccrimestoppers.com. The file stays open, the desk stays ready. Until next time. If this case stayed with you, subscribe to the Unsolved desk. We cover America's most well-known cold cases, the ones that made headlines, haunted communities, and still don't have answers. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single case. And share this video with someone. You never know who might be watching that has the one piece of information that changes everything.